Good morning, First Baptist Worcester. Thank you for inviting me to be with you this morning. I'm delighted that that's one of the gifts of this time is that we are able to connect far and wide to churches that we don't have to be physically present to. But I am so thrilled that I know enough about Massachusetts and have spent enough time there to know how to pronounce Worcester, because wouldn't that be awful if I came on and said, "Good morning, First Baptist Worcester" or something. Anyway, I'm delighted to be with you this morning. Thank you for having me. I've always loved the story of Joseph. I remember as a little girl in my West Texas Baptist church lining up all my brightest crayons to make his coat of many colors. And I remember being fascinated by his dreams and the drama of his life. I remember being told that I was to be like Joseph, who trusted God and forgave even his awful brothers because he knew that God always would take care of him. And because I was a sassy little thing, I also remember thinking that it sure didn't look like God was taking good care of Joseph when he let his brothers throw him in that ditch and left him for dead and let him get sold into slavery. Because who in their right minds, when going through something like that, thinks, if I just wait a while, I'm going to come out on top? And that was the unspoken message that I heard in that story. If we trust God, we will end up on top. People intend to do harm, but God is going to turn those things into a winning situation. The older I got, though, the more impossible it seemed to believe that, because everyone listening today knows a situation that was meant to harm someone, and it did, and those people did not come out on top. They came out, we came out, bruised and brokenhearted. Makes it hard to believe that God intends all things for good. What do we do with this? How do we make meaning of our pain and our suffering, of injustice and violence and hatred? I don't entirely know, but I don't believe the answer is, as Joseph's brothers fretted it was, to pay back in full the wrong done to us. For me, what makes Joseph's story worth knowing and worth wondering about is that he likely had no idea he was going to come out on top. No idea if his life would ever take a turn for the better. But by the end of this brotherhood story, he had stumbled into something that feels like faith, which, to his credit, is not an easy thing to do when your brothers seem to be manipulating you all over again. They realize now, with their father gone, that Joseph could just go Old Testament on them to poke fun at the pun. So they come to him in this passage that we read today, and they say their father left these instructions. We don't know whether Joseph questioned their motives as true or fair. What we do know, actually, is that he wept. And his cries feel heavy to me here. Part release at the culmination of a very long ordeal, part heartbreak at all that history of pain and betrayal on both sides, part humble recognition at what a strange exchange of power this all has been. I wonder if he also cries at their vulnerability in that moment and his, all laid bare. Whatever was happening on the inside, Joseph responded in this moment with love and compassion. He says to his brothers, "Do not be afraid." And I can't help but hear those same words in Isaiah, in the angel's greeting to Mary, in Jesus' words to the disciples after Holy Week. Do not be afraid is a greeting often needed before anything else can be heard. And then Joseph says, even though you planned to harm me, God intended it for good. It feels so easy, doesn't it, when we read this verse at a distance, here at the moment of happily ever after? We can so quickly forget the cost of this wisdom, the time, the suffering, the pains of inner transformation. It's pretty miraculous how Joseph had the capacity for mercy after all that had happened. I wouldn't have blamed him if he had shut down and turned callous on his brothers in that moment. Again, they literally left him for dead and lied about what they'd done, and that was all after spending his whole childhood bullying him. What a gift that he turned his power and privilege instead into mercy when it came time. It makes me think of what Richard Rohr says, that if we don't transform our pain, we just end up transmitting it. The miracle here, the gift, is that Joseph chose to let his pain change him for the better, to let it soften him instead of harden his heart. And because he allowed compassion to rule so completely over him, when the time came, compassion flowed easily through him. Maybe Joseph returned evil for good because he knew intimately and without fail that only the good is going to last anyway. The rest leaves a mark, but only love can do the healing. And that's because God, in fact, does intend things for good. It's not in God's nature to do otherwise. God's nature is goodness, and our origin is goodness. And at the end of all things will be abiding goodness. That's shalom. That's the kingdom. But I hope we realize by now that this won't ever be an all or nothing situation. God intends to bring good, even and maybe especially out of the messes of our own creation. But sometimes we use those same things to amplify division, to breed hate, to cause disruption and disconnection. God intends all things for good. The real question is whether we can enter into all things in such a way that we find it. As Naomi Remen says, life offers its wisdom generously. Everything teaches. Not everyone learns. God bless Jacob. He learned. One of the many gifts I believe Jesus gave us in the way he lived such a deeply human life is that he uncompromisingly chose love, regardless of the situation. Think about all the things he experienced. He was honored and he was ridiculed. He was revered and hated. He was followed by thousands, and he also was ignored. But regardless of the situation, he always chose love. And because of all of that, there is room in the resurrected life of Jesus for everything and anything we go through. Jesus has brought all of that human experience into the life of God. And he's made a way for even the most shadowed, harrowing things to become life to us and to become love for us. I don't know how this works. I don't think it's about it working actually at all, to be honest. The only way I know to access the life that comes after impossibly awful and terrible things is to sit with them, to let them break us a little, only because they already have, and to deny that would to be lying. And then to hold it up to God and say, help, here, what now? And we often find we're given a sliver of light, of hope, to take that next step, to let go of some anger or some bitterness, to siphon off our defenses and become a little more deeply human and more compassionate, to learn. It's easier said than done, of course, because it's hard to find clarity when we're in pain. But when clarity comes, usually it comes to reorient us to what's true beyond our pain. I had a fight with someone that I love recently, and because I felt hurt, like you do, I did the cold shoulder thing and the I'm going to be over here until they earn my love thing in response. And a few days later, I was sitting in silent prayer. The clarity tends to come most regularly, I think, when we sit in silence. And I realized that all of my reactions to this event were, to be blunt, ridiculous. What was I doing? I don't actually believe the world works this way. I literally wrote a whole book about how God loves us relentlessly and we don't have to earn God's love, but only to return to it, and that our calling as humans is to rest in that love so much that we return to it and live in it in our own human relationships, that we are abiding effortlessly in that divine love. And now, here I am in a beloved relationship being a bean counter, over here being a teetotaler and a works righteousness person. That's crazy. So I took a moment and I breathed deep, and I reminded myself that my pain doesn't change what's most true. And what's most true is that I believe that living in love is, in fact, the best way, even when we do it imperfectly, as we always will. So I went back to this person, and in the safety of that relationship, because it is a safe relationship, I said, listen, there are some things to work out about this, but also, I love you, and I'm sorry for acting like I don't. That's my fault. That's on me. Love takes a long time to learn. I sometimes think of grace like an invitation. The invitation often comes most powerfully at those moments where bad stuff happens. We lose a job, a relationship falls apart, who we thought we were gets exposed and exploded by our own regrettable decisions. Sometimes, though, the bad stuff is just that we're at the wrong place at the wrong time. But whatever the situation, it's unwelcome. This is not a planned vacation for us. And so we find ourselves stuck somewhere that we don't want to be, trying to figure out, well, now what? What do we do next? And maybe this situation asks us to learn something hard about ourselves that we'd rather avoid. Maybe it asks us to accept that life doesn't always turn out roses. And maybe we're frustrated about this particular situation because our privilege has just kept us so guarded from that for such a long time. Regardless, there's inner work involved. There's a soul mess that needs some tending. And here, we can either receive the invitation into the mess, or we can just decide we won't let anything change us. If we let in the mess, grace happens. We find that God loves us anyway, and there's actually a few ways forward, thank goodness, and there's hope in tomorrow. And then we emerge with some gentleness because you're always a little tender when you've just gone through the ringer. And sometimes we say no to the invitation. We can't reject the mess. We're not that in control of the universe, but we can refuse to see it or listen to it or sit in it or acknowledge it in any helpful way to let it change us. It's a path of la, la, la with our fingers in our ears. And while we may still find our way out of it, we won't leave that situation with a gift of grace that could have made the other side a little more filled with love and less self-righteousness. I know a guy who was raised with a lot of privilege and opportunity. It's a long story, but he ended up running away from home and he became homeless for a time. And when I learned that he was sleeping at a shelter, I prayed that he would accept his grace invitation. He would see the humanity of the guys that were sleeping next to him, maybe come to recognize some folly and pride within him. I prayed that he would be humbled by accepting this unconditional assistance he was being given by so many people around him. But when he left there, it was like the experience hadn't remotely seeped in to his heart. If anything, he had hardened. He had become less gracious, more judgmental. I have to tell you, it's a really strange thing to hear someone who lived on government welfare for a year rail and complain against government welfare without any hint of hypocrisy or self-reflection. I tell you this because not everybody becomes Joseph. It's not a guaranteed thing to see where God can intend everything for good. It does actually require acceptance of the grace invitation, which we don't get unless we really do that work in the mess of things. The truth is, we know now more intimately than ever that we can't control what comes our way in this life. We can't. But what we can do is be aware of the grace invitation that comes when any trial or trouble reaches our doorstep. We can let the hardship harden us, or we can let the grace break us open until we see the goodness seep through. We get to see over the long arc of Joseph's life how he keeps accepting the grace invitations over and over until he is truly transformed. And for Joseph, clarity came over many years through a dream. Remember when he was a young boy and he sidled up to the breakfast table and told all his brothers that they would one day bow before him? At that time, he thought the dream meant that he was better than his brothers. And as it turned out, his brothers thought that's what he meant too, which is how he landed in that ditch. But over the years, his ego had an opportunity to deflate. First in the ditch, and then in that jail after the whole misunderstanding with Potiphar's wife, and probably in a million small other ways. And all of this learned humility, this unwilling entrance into the human situation, culminated in the day his dream came true. And his brothers did come before him and fall down and bow. Because something had changed. While his brothers were still living in the world of hierarchy and power and us versus them, Joseph had moved on and moved into the world of love and grace and interconnection, where I cannot be free until you are free. They were still living in the story of death, and Joseph, because he accepted all those grace invitations, lived in the story of life instead. And this story of life did what it always does. It saved them all. It saved the brothers from a revenge they rightly deserved. It saved Joseph from a bitterness that would only continue to destroy him. And it saved the nation of Israel, because when you have an advocate for life at the center of even an empire, you can do some good. God intends all things for good and works all things together for good. It's not in God's nature to do otherwise. But it still requires us to learn the lesson of goodness and love and to begin living into it. The story of Joseph is the story of someone growing up from thinking the world was all about him to realizing the world is really all about love. And once he accepted that, he knew and began to trust that to forgive, to reconcile, to love his brothers was the path that would bring the most life to everyone. How is God inviting you to trust that path more today? What grace invitations await you in the hard stuff of life right now? Where have you found yourself getting lost in the bean counting and the works righteousness and the revenge dreaming? And how can you find your way back to that home at the center of your heart that is love, 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 and let it soften you? May we all be wise and brave enough to accept the grace invitations that come to us, that we may choose the path that brings all of us closer to abundant life. Amen? Amen.